Giwan floated in the observation module of the International Space Station, her eyes fixed on the readings that made no sense. For 3 days now, her instruments had been detecting something impossible. Space itself seemed to be folding, bending in ways that violated every law of physics she knew. She checked the equipment again, ran diagnostics for the 100th time, but the data remained unchanged. Something massive was coming. When the ships finally appeared, they didn't arrive like anything humanity had imagined. There was no dramatic flash of light or thunderous explosion. One moment, the space beyond Mars was empty. The next moment, it wasn't. Hundreds of vessels materialized in perfect formation, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. The smallest ship dwarfed an aircraft carrier. The largest looked like a floating city made of silver metal that seemed to shimmer and shift in the sunlight. Giwan's hands shook as she activated the emergency protocols. Within minutes, every space agency on Earth received her transmission. Within an hour, the world knew they were no longer alone in the universe. Within 2 hours, the aliens made contact. The holographic image appeared simultaneously in every major capital city on Earth. It showed a creature that looked vaguely humanoid, but was clearly not human. Its skin had a pale blue tint, and its eyes were too large, too dark, completely black like pools of ink. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English. Perfect Mandarin, perfect Korean, perfect every language on Earth all at once. "People of Earth," the alien said, its voice calm and measured. "I am Ambassador Thalvin of the Galactic Collective. We have come to welcome you into our family of civilized worlds. For 10,000 of your years, we have maintained peace and order across this galaxy. We have guided 3,000 species into prosperity and safety. Now, it is your turn to join us." Hyunwha watched the broadcast from the command center deep beneath Seoul, as one of Earth's top military strategists. He had been rushed into an emergency meeting with other world leaders. The general's trained eye studied every detail of the alien's presentation. The way it stood, the way it spoke, everything about it radiated absolute confidence. This was not a request. This was a demand wrapped in polite words. "You have 72 hours to accept our terms," Thalvin continued. "Integration into the collective is not optional for any species we encounter. Those who join willingly prosper under our guidance. Those who resist." The alien paused, and something that might have been a smile crossed its strange face. "Well, there are no species who have continued to resist for long. We will return in 3 days for your answer." The hologram vanished, leaving behind a shocked and terrified world. In Seoul, Hyunwha turned to the other military leaders gathered in the room. "We need to see what we're dealing with," he said quietly. "Someone get me everything we can gather about those ships." That someone was Doyen, a civilian engineer who had been working on experimental satellite systems. He wasn't supposed to be in military briefings, but his equipment had captured more data on the alien fleet than anyone else's. He was young, barely 30, with messy hair and clothes that looked like he'd slept in them. But when he started explaining what his instruments had detected, everyone in the room fell silent. "Their ships use some kind of energy field for protection," Doyen said, pulling up images on the main screen. "But look at this. The field is uniform, consistent, predictable. It's perfect, actually. Too perfect. It's like they calculated the most efficient possible shield and just stopped innovating. And their weapons appear to be the same. Highly efficient energy beams that follow straight-line trajectories. No variation, no creativity in the design." Hyun-woo leaned forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying their technology is incredibly advanced, but it's stagnant. Everything follows patterns, rules, mathematical precision. There's no chaos in their design, no improvisation." Doyen looked around the room nervously. "I could be completely wrong, but if I had to guess, I'd say they've been using the same basic technology for a very long time. While military minds analyzed the threat, Murray worked on understanding the message itself. As Earth's lead xenolinguist, she had been studying the broadcast frame by frame, word by word. What she found disturbed her more than the threat of invasion. "They're not negotiating," she told the diplomatic council. "The language patterns, the sentence structures, Everything about their communication suggests they don't even have a concept of actual negotiation. They present terms. They expect acceptance. There's no framework in their language for compromise or mutual agreement. It's all about submission or force. Can we communicate with them? Make them understand we want peace, but not surrender? Asked one of the diplomats. Mar shook her head slowly. I don't think they'll understand the distinction. To them, peace and submission are the same thing. They've been doing this for 10,000 years. They've probably never met a species that said no and survived to tell about it. The 72 hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings, public panic, and desperate preparations. Some nations wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight. But as the deadline approached, something remarkable happened. Despite their countless differences, despite their long histories of conflict, humanity began to unite. Not out of love for each other, but out of a shared refusal to kneel. When the alien fleet returned, Hyunwoo stood before the cameras to deliver Earth's response. Beside him stood representatives from every major nation. Behind him, transmitted across the globe, stood billions of humans watching and waiting. The hologram of Thalvin appeared again, that same confident expression on its face. We have returned for your answer. Will you join the Galactic Collective peacefully? Hyunwoo took a deep breath. His military training told him this was suicide. His analysis of their technology told him Earth had no chance in direct combat. But something deeper, something fundamentally human, made him speak the words that would change everything. No, he said simply, we will not surrender our freedom. If you want Earth, you'll have to take it by force. And we will make you pay for every meter of ground. The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then Thalvin's expression changed. The confidence cracked, replaced by something that looked like genuine confusion. You refuse? You have seen our fleet. You must understand you cannot win. Probably not, Hyunwoo admitted. But we're going to fight anyway. That's what humans do. We don't surrender. We don't bow. And we definitely don't let anyone take our home without a fight. The hologram flickered and disappeared. On every screen, in every home, humans watched as the alien fleet began to move into attack formation. High above Earth's atmosphere, Giwan watched from the space station as the massive ships prepared for battle. She whispered a prayer for her planet, for her species, and for the impossible fight that was about to begin. In his command center, Hyunwoo gave the order that every military installation on Earth had been waiting for. All units engage defensive positions. Show them what happens when you threaten humanity. The war for Earth's freedom had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The collective's first attack came at dawn. Vexter, the high commander of the fleet, had chosen a single target to make an example. A small military base in the Pacific, isolated and insignificant. The plan was simple: destroy it completely, quickly, and show humanity the futility of resistance. The operation was calculated to take exactly 14 minutes. It took 2 hours. And the base was still standing. Vexler stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His ships had followed standard attack protocols perfectly. Energy beams had targeted military installations with mathematical precision. But the humans weren't fighting back in any way the collective's combat computers could predict. They didn't hold defensive lines. They didn't follow any recognizable battle formation. Instead, they scattered, regrouped, attacked from unexpected angles, and used tactics that the collective database labeled as erratic and inefficient. They're using civilian vehicles as weapons, reported his tactical officer, its voice carrying a note of confusion that Vexler had never heard before. A transport aircraft just crashed directly into our shield generator. The pilot made no attempt to eject. The generator is damaged. Possible, Vexler said. Our shields can withstand direct missile impacts. A primitive aircraft cannot. The aircraft was carrying improvised explosives. Crude chemical devices that shouldn't have. The officer stopped mid-sentence as another alert flashed across the display. Commander, they're doing it again. Multiple civilian craft on collision courses. They're not trying to escape. They're attacking. This wasn't how warfare worked. In the 10,000 years of the collective's existence, battle followed rules. You analyzed your opponent's capabilities, calculated the optimal strategy, and executed with precision. When a civilization faced overwhelming force, they surrendered to preserve their population. That was logical. That was civil. This was neither. Sujan pulled his fighter into a steep climb, his instruments screaming warnings about structural stress. He ignored them. Behind him, 2 collective interceptors followed in perfect formation, their weapons charging for another shot. They flew exactly as his tactical computer predicted they would, which meant they flew exactly as he wanted them to. "Come on," he muttered, watching his altimeter climb. Just a little higher. At 15,000 meters, he cut his engines and flipped his fighter backward in a maneuver that would have gotten him court-martialed during peacetime. The collective ships, confused by the sudden stop, overshot him by several hundred meters. Seojin had exactly 2 seconds before their combat systems compensated. He used 1 second to reactivate his engines. He used the other to fire every missile he had. The first collective ship exploded in a ball of fire and debris. The second took damage, but remained operational. Its weapons swung toward Seojin, energy gathering in visible pulses of blue light. He didn't have time to evade. He didn't have any weapons left. But he still had his fighter, and it was moving very fast. Later, the official report would call it a tactical ramming maneuver. Seojin called it the stupidest thing I've ever done that actually worked. His fighter slammed into the collective ship at full speed. His ejection seat fired a fraction of a second before impact. He blacked out from the GI forces, and when he woke up, he was floating in the ocean. Watching pieces of both ships rain down from the sky, he started laughing and couldn't stop. By the end of the first day, the collective had lost 12 ships. In 10,000 years of warfare, they had never lost 12 ships in a single battle. By the end of the second day, they had lost 37. The attack on the Pacific base was quietly abandoned. Vexther reported to the Collective Council that humanity required additional study before full subjugation could proceed. Yuna had been a cybersecurity specialist before the invasion. She had spent her career protecting corporate networks from hackers. Now she was using those same skills to hack an alien computer system, and she was having the time of her life. The Collective's communication networks were incredibly sophisticated, but they had one critical flaw. They assumed no one would ever try to break into them. Their security is almost non-existent, she explained to Minho, who understood exactly none of what she was doing, but appreciated the results. They've been the dominant power for so long that they forgot about the concept of information warfare. I've been inside their tactical network for 6 hours now. I can see everything they're planning. Can you change their plans? Minho asked. He was a Marine officer who had been training his entire life for combat against human enemies. Fighting aliens wasn't that different, except the aliens were terrible at close-quarters fighting and seemed genuinely confused by concepts like ambush and guerrilla warfare. Yuna's fingers flew across her keyboard. Better than that, I can feed them false information. Watch this. She executed a command, and somewhere in orbit, Collective ship received sensor data indicating a massive human military buildup in the middle of Antarctica. The ship dutifully reported this to its command vessel, which redirected significant resources to address the non-existent threat. That's beautiful, Minho said, grinning. Now, while they're looking at penguins, we can hit their actual supply depot. The raid on the Collective's supply depot was humanity's first ground victory. Minho led a team of 300 Marines against what intelligence suggested was a lightly defended logistics station. They expected resistance. They expected casualties. What they found was something different. The Collective soldiers at the depot outnumbered the human force by almost 3-1. They had superior weapons, better armor, and defensive positions. But when Minho's team attacked, something strange happened. The alien soldiers fought back, but they fought like machines following a program. They held their positions until those positions were overrun. They followed their orders until their commanders were killed. And then they just stopped. They're not surrendering, one of Minho's sergeants reported, confusion in his voice. They're just standing there. Some of them are asking for orders. They don't know what to do without someone telling them what to do. Minho watched as alien soldiers, individually stronger and better armed than his Marines, simply waited to be captured because their command structure had been disrupted. It was the strangest thing he had ever seen in combat. "Secure them," he ordered, "and someone find me their database. I want to know how an empire this rigid has survived for 10,000 years." The answer, Suyun discovered later, was both simple and disturbing. She was a xenobiologist, rushed into military service to study captured alien specimens. What she found was that the collective had been breeding the instinct for independent thought out of their soldiers for millennia. They had created a perfect military force that followed orders without question, fought without fear, and never, ever thought for itself. "They're not stupid," she explained to Hyun-woo during a briefing. "They're highly intelligent, actually. But they've been conditioned, maybe even genetically modified, to rely completely on hierarchical command. Cut off the head, and the body doesn't know what to do. It's incredibly efficient when fighting other civilized species who follow similar military doctrines. But against us, it's a fatal weakness," Hyun-woo finished. He looked at the reports coming in from every battlefield, every engagement. Humanity was losing badly by every traditional metric. The collective had more ships, better weapons, superior technology, but they were losing battles they should have won because they couldn't adapt to human unpredictability. "We're not going to win this war by fighting fair," he said quietly. "We're going to win it by fighting dirty, by breaking every rule of warfare they think exists. We're going to be so chaotic, so unpredictable, so absolutely insane that their perfect military machine just breaks above Earth in the collective flagship." Vexter reviewed casualty reports and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of military service: doubt. The humans were primitives. They barely had faster-than-light travel. Their weapons were crude. Their tactics were absurd, but they kept winning. He watched footage from the latest engagement. A human pilot, wounded and out of ammunition, had sung something into his communication channel before ramming his damaged fighter into a collective cruiser. The translation software identified it as a song about courage and defiance. The pilot had died laughing. "What are these creatures?" Vexter whispered to himself. "What species fights like this? What species prefers death to surrender?" He didn't know that across Earth, billions of humans were asking themselves a similar question. What species invades others and expects them not to fight back? And more importantly, what happens when that species finally meets one that refuses to bow? The war was far from over, but something had changed. The collective had come to Earth expecting quick submission. Instead, they had found something they hadn't encountered in millennia, an enemy that simply wouldn't quit. Juan hadn't slept in 36 hours. She sat in a laboratory that had once been used for peaceful research, now converted into a wartime think tank. Around her, screens displayed stolen collective technology, captured databases, and analysis reports from a dozen different scientific teams. What she was reading made her both excited and terrified. "They stopped evolving," she said aloud, even though she was alone in the room. 10,000 years ago, they reached what they considered technological perfection, and they just stopped. She pulled up comparison charts. Human technology was crude by collective standards, but it showed something the alien tech didn't: constant change. Every decade brought new innovations, new approaches, new ideas. Sometimes those ideas failed spectacularly. Sometimes they revolutionized everything. But they never stopped coming. The collective's technology, in contrast, had barely changed in millennia. Their ships used the same basic designs. Their weapons operated on the same principles. Their shields followed the same mathematical formulas. It was all incredibly efficient, perfectly optimized, and completely predictable. "That's why Doyen's improvised weapons work," she muttered, typing notes rapidly. "They're not optimized. They're not efficient. They're weird and unpredictable, and their collective's computers don't know how to respond to them, because nothing in their database prepared them for someone weaponizing a communication satellite or turning a mining laser into a ship-to-ship cannon." Her computer beeped with an incoming call. Hyanwu's face appeared on the screen, looking even more exhausted than she felt. "Tell me you found something useful," he said without preamble. "I found everything," Jiwan replied. "The collective isn't just stagnant technologically. They're stagnant strategically, culturally, in every way that matters. They've been doing the same thing the same way for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt. And I think I know why they've been successful for so long despite that weakness." She sent him a data file. "Look at their conquest history. Every species they've absorbed was peaceful when they encountered them. Not just peaceful, actually peaceful. Species that had achieved interstellar travel without ever developing military technology. Species that had unified their worlds through cooperation and diplomacy. The collective shows up, demonstrates overwhelming force, and these civilizations surrender because they've never had to fight for anything." Hyunwoo scrolled through the data, his expression growing darker. "They've been picking on pacifists for 10,000 years. Exactly. And any warrior species they encountered, they destroyed completely. Glassed their planets, erased them from existence. The collective isn't a civilization of warriors. They're a civilization of bullies who got very good at beating up people who couldn't fight back. Till they met us," Hyunwoo said quietly. "Till they met us," Giwan confirmed. "A species that spent its entire history fighting. Fighting each other, fighting nature, fighting everything. We've been at war for thousands of years. We've created weapons that could destroy our own planet multiple times over. We're really, really good at violence, and they have no idea how to handle that." Hyunwoo closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something new in his expression. Not just determination, but understanding. "We can win this. We can win this," Giwan agreed. "But we need to be smarter. I'm sending you some ideas." Those ideas became Operation Chaos, humanity's first major offensive operation. Instead of defending and reacting, they were going to attack. But they weren't going to attack like any military force the collective had ever encountered. Doyan stood in what used to be an automobile factory, now repurposed into a weapons development facility. Around him, teams of engineers, scientists, and technicians worked on projects that made no sense to traditional military thinking. They were building weapons that were inefficient, impractical, and absolutely devastating in their unpredictability. "This one uses a quantum probability field to make the missile's trajectory impossible to calculate," explained one engineer, gesturing to a device that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts. "It doesn't fly in a straight line. It doesn't follow any mathematical curve. It just goes wherever it feels like going until it hits something." "How do we aim it?" asked a visiting military officer. "We don't. We just fire it in the general direction of the enemy and hope for the best." The officer looked horrified. Doyen looked delighted. "It's perfect. Build 100 of them." Similar scenes played out across Earth, weapons that violated every principle of efficient design, tactics that no sane military academy would ever teach, strategies that required levels of coordination the collective couldn't achieve, and levels of chaos they couldn't comprehend. When Operation Chaos launched, it hit the collective fleet like a hurricane hitting a glass house. Human ships appeared from impossible angles, having used flight paths that violated standard navigation safety protocols. They fired weapons that behaved in ways the collective's defensive computers couldn't predict. When collective ships tried to respond with their perfectly calculated counterattacks, human vessels simply weren't. Where the calculations said they should be, Saiyajin led a squadron of fighters in what he called the stupidest attack run ever conceived by military minds. They flew directly into the heart of the collective formation. Weapons firing randomly, engines cutting in and out, following no pattern or formation. The collective's point defense systems, designed to intercept incoming threats based on predicted trajectories, simply couldn't lock on to targets that had no consistent trajectory. "This is insane," his wingman shouted over the radio, even as she destroyed her third enemy ship. "This violates every rule of fighter combat." "I know," Saiyajin replied, laughing as he dodged return fire through a maneuver that his onboard computer was screaming was impossible. "Isn't it great?" Minho's ground forces were simultaneously hitting collective outposts across the lunar surface. But they weren't attacking like a conventional military force. Some teams disguised themselves as civilians. Others used psychological warfare, broadcasting messages designed to confuse and demoralize enemy troops who had never experienced doubt. One team, in an operation that would become legendary, captured an entire enemy command post by simply walking in through the front door and confidently acting like they belonged there. They didn't even question us, the team leader reported afterward, still sounding amazed. We just walked past security into their command center, and they assumed we must be authorized because who would be stupid enough to just walk in? By the time they realized something was wrong, we had control of their computers. Una had escalated from hacking their communications to completely invading their tactical network. She was feeding false sensor data to entire battle groups, rerouting supply ships to wrong coordinates, and occasionally making enemy vessels play Earth music over their internal speakers just to mess with them. Got one of their admirals, too, accidentally. Send a formal complaint about his own fleet's performance? To the wrong department, she told her team, barely able to contain her laughter. They spent 6 hours sorting out the bureaucratic confusion. 6 hours. In the middle of a battle? The collective's response to Operation Chaos was slow, confused, and ultimately ineffective. Their military doctrine had no provision for an enemy that fought without following any doctrine at all. Their commanders tried to adapt, but adaptation wasn't something they had practiced in millennia. By the time Vexter understood what humanity was doing, they had already lost control of the space around Earth's moon, in the collective flagship. Emergency meetings ran continuously. Vexter stood before a holographic display showing the current tactical situation, and it made no sense. By every logical metric, the collective should be winning. They had more ships, better weapons, superior technology, but the tactical map showed human forces advancing on multiple fronts, collective positions in retreat, and casualty rates that would have been unthinkable a month ago. They fight without honor, complained one of his subordinate commanders. Without respect for proper military conduct, they use civilian vessels as weapons. They fake surrender signals. They win, Vexter interrupted quietly. That's what they do. They win battles they should lose because they don't care about proper military conduct. They care about survival. He thought about the reports from captured human soldiers. They didn't break under interrogation. They didn't provide useful intelligence. Instead, they taunted their captors, told jokes about the collective's military incompetence, and in one memorable case, convinced 3 guards that their orders had been changed and they should release the prisoner. The guards had actually done it before anyone realized what had happened. What are we doing wrong? Asked his tactical officer. Vexter stared at the display for a long moment before answering. We're fighting them like they're a civilized species. Like they'll follow rules, behave predictably, respond to superior force with submission. But they're not civilized. Not in any way we understand. They're chaos given form, and chaos cannot be defeated with order. Then how do we defeat them? It was the right question, but Vexter had no answer. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought was forming that he didn't want to acknowledge. What if they couldn't defeat humanity? What if for the first time in 10,000 years, the collective had encountered a species they simply couldn't conquer? On Earth, in the command center beneath Sol, Hyunwoo allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The war wasn't won. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, still facing an enemy with 10,000 years of galactic dominance behind them. But for the first time since the collective arrived, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were winning. What's our next move? Murray asked. She had transitioned from diplomatic work to strategic planning. She was proving surprisingly good at predicting enemy responses. Hyunwoo smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. We keep doing what we're doing. We stay unpredictable. We stay chaotic. We keep being everything they're not prepared for. And we make them regret ever thinking they could rule Earth. The data core from the captured collective command ship sat in a secure facility, and what it contained changed everything. Murray had spent weeks decrypting and translating the information, working with linguistic experts and computer scientists to understand 10,000 years of galactic history. What she found made her physically ill. They didn't build an empire, she told the emergency council, her voice tight with controlled anger. They built a prison. Every species in the collective surrendered because they had never known war. They were peaceful civilizations who achieved space travel through cooperation and scientific advancement. The collective showed up with weapons these species had never even conceived of and demanded submission.
Oh.
She displayed images on the main screen. Hundreds of alien species, all recorded in the collective's databases. Beings of every shape and size, from gas cloud creatures to silicon-based leaf. E-forms all cataloged with the same notation, integrated through overwhelming force demonstration. Zero military resistance. And the ones who did resist? Hyunwoo asked, though he already suspected the answer. Murray's expression hardened. Extinct. Completely wiped out. The collective has a list of 47 species they encountered over the millennia who had warrior cultures or refused to surrender. All of them were destroyed. Planets sterilized. Entire civilizations erased from existence. The last one was 5,000 years ago. The room fell silent. 5,000 years? The collective hadn't faced real military opposition in 5,000 years. No wonder they were so unprepared for humanity. There's more, Murray continued. The database contains communication logs from other collective-controlled worlds. And Yuna found a way to broadcast to them. Yuna stepped forward, looking nervous but determined. I've been sending messages to subjugated species for 2 weeks now, showing them footage of human victories, showing them that the collective can bleed. The response has been significant. She activated a star map. Dozens of systems lit up in red across the collective's territory. These are locations where we've detected internal conflicts, resistance movements, rebellions. Some of them are small, barely noticeable. Others are full-scale uprisings. All of them started after they saw what Earth was doing. Hyunwoo studied the map carefully. How is the collective responding? They're pulling ships away from Earth to deal with the rebellions, Yuna reported. They've never had to handle this before. For 10,000 years, their subjects stayed peaceful because they believed the collective was unbeatable. Now that belief is shattered. Started a revolution, Guan said quietly. Not just for Earth, for the entire galaxy. The implications were staggering. Earth wasn't just fighting for its own survival anymore. Whether they intended it or not, they had become a symbol of resistance for every enslaved species in the collective. And symbols were powerful weapons. Taeyeon was 17 years old, a mathematical prodigy who had been pulled from university to work on the war effort. Most people dismissed him because of his age, but Doyon had recognized genius when he saw it. Now Taeyeon sat in a laboratory, surrounded by equations that described the fundamental nature of the collective's faster-than-light travel. It's actually simple once you understand the underlying principles, he explained. To a room full of scientists twice his age, they fold space using a quantum field generator. The math is elegant, but it's also limited. They can only fold space along specific dimensional axes because that's the most efficient method. Can we do better? Asked one of the scientists. Taeyeon grinned. We can do weirder. Efficiency doesn't matter if your enemy can't predict where you're going to appear. I've been working on modifications that introduce controlled randomness into the folding process. It's less efficient, uses more energy, but it means our ships can appear from angles the collective sensors say are impossible within a week. The first human ships equipped with Taeyeon's modifications began field testing. They disappeared from one location and reappeared in another, but not along any path the collective could predict or intercept. It gave human forces a mobility advantage that completely changed the tactical situation. Yemen led the first deep space raid using the new technology. He was a special forces operative who had volunteered for what everyone assumed would be a suicide mission, infiltrating a collective command ship. His team of 20 humans jumped through space using coordinates that should have been impossible, appeared directly inside the enemy vessel's shield perimeter, and breached the hull before the defenders even knew they were under attack. Contact. Someone shouted as they pushed through corridors designed for beings larger than humans. Multiple hostiles ahead. But when they reached the collective soldiers, something unexpected happened. The aliens fought back, but it was clear they had never trained for close-quarters combat. They held their weapons awkwardly at distances too far for enclosed spaces. They tried to maintain formation in corridors too narrow for it. When Yemen's team closed to hand-to-hand range, the collective soldiers simply didn't know what to do. They've never had to fight like this, Yemen realized as he disarmed an alien twice his size with a basic judo throw. They've only ever fought in open space or long-range engagements. They don't know how to brawl. His team reached the command deck in less than 15 minutes. They found Vexler himself there, standing calmly as armed humans burst through the door. The alien commander didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't call for help. He simply studied them with those two large, too dark eyes. "You are Yemen," Vexter said, somehow knowing his name. "Commander of Human Special Operations. Your psychological profile indicates high risk tolerance and creative tactical thinking." "You've been studying us?" Yemen replied, keeping his weapon trained on the alien. "Of course. You are the most fascinating species we have encountered in millennia. Also, the most frustrating." Vexter gestured to his command staff to stand down. "You have captured this vessel. I will not resist. But I wish to understand something. Why do you fight so hard? You must know the collective has resources you cannot match. Even with your recent successes, we can bring more ships, more soldiers. Why not accept peace under our rule?" Yemen lowered his weapon slightly, though he didn't holster it. "Because peace without freedom isn't peace. It's just slavery with better marketing. And humans don't do slavery. Not anymore. We fought a war against ourselves to end it on our own planet. We're sure as hell not going to accept it from aliens. But you will die. Your species will be destroyed if you continue to resist." Maybe Yemen acknowledged. "But we'll die free. And we'll take as many of you with us as we can. That's worth something." Vexler was quiet for a long moment. "I am beginning to understand why the collective has lost every engagement with your species. You do not calculate cost versus benefit. You do not weigh survival against submission. You simply refuse to be conquered, regardless of the consequences." "Now you're getting it," Yemen said. "Secure him. We're taking this ship home." The capture of a collective command vessel and its high commander sent shockwaves through both human and alien forces. For humanity, it was proof that they could strike at the heart of the enemy. For the collective, it was something they had never experienced: humiliation. Back on Earth, Anna worked in a medical facility that had been overwhelmed with casualties since the war began. She was a trauma surgeon who had developed new techniques for treating injuries that Cond Vendeson said were untreatable. Soldiers who should have died were surviving because she refused to give up on them. "The collective's weapons caused damage at the cellular level," she explained to her medical team. "Conventional surgery can't fix that. But if we use nanobotic repair systems combined with stem cell therapy and some very aggressive immunosuppressants, we can regenerate tissue faster than the weapon damage can spread." "That shouldn't work," said one of the other doctors. "I know," Hannah replied cheerfully. "But it does anyway. Now, help me save this patient's life." Her techniques were shared across human medical facilities worldwide. Survival rates increased dramatically. Soldiers who had been written off as casualties returned to duty. It was another small way humans refused to accept the limitations the collective assumed existed. In orbit above Earth, the collective fleet held position, but no longer pressed their attack. They were waiting for reinforcements, regrouping, trying to understand how they had lost control of the situation so completely. Vexler, now held in a secure but relatively comfortable detention facility, spent his days being interviewed by human scientists and military analysts. "You want to know how to defeat us?" he said to Heinwu during one session. "You assume we have some secret weakness you haven't discovered yet, don't we?" Hyun-woo asked. "You've already discovered it. We are a civilization built on order, efficiency, and predictability. You are a civilization built on chaos, creativity, and stubbornness. These are not compatible philosophies. One must yield to the other. We're not yielding, obviously. Which means For the first time in our history, we must consider the possibility that the collective will yield instead. Vexthor's expression was unreadable. Do you understand what that means? You have not just threatened Earth's conquest. You have threatened the entire philosophical foundation of our civilization. If we cannot subjugate you, then perhaps we were never as superior as we believed. Hyunwoo considered this carefully. What happens now? Now, the collective council decides whether to commit their full strength to destroying you. Consequences be damned, or whether to do something they have never done before. Retreat. As if in response to his words, new contacts appeared on long-range sends. Oars. Hundreds of them. The collective's reinforcements had arrived, and they dwarfed the fleet that had first come to Earth. The final battle was approaching, and it would decide not just Earth's fate, but the future of the entire galaxy. The collective's full fleet arrived like a storm made of starships. They filled the space around Earth's solar system with so many vessels that they blotted out the stars. Every military analyst who saw the scanner readings came to the same conclusion. This was unwinnable. The collective had brought enough firepower to sterilize a dozen planets. Earth's defenders, battered and exhausted from months of fighting, simply didn't have the numbers to stand against it. "They're going to kill us all," someone whispered in the command center. Nobody contradicted them because it was probably true. Hyunwoo stood before the tactical display, his face calm despite the hopelessness of the situation. Around him, the military leaders of Earth waited for orders that wouldn't save them but might at least let them die with dignity. He looked at each of them in turn, these men and women who had fought so hard for so long. "We knew this might happen," he said quietly. "From the moment we refused to surrender, we knew it might end like this. So I'm not going to lie to you. We probably can't win this battle, but we're going to fight it anyway, and we're going to make them remember us. We're going to make them pay such a price for Earth that every species in the galaxy will know we didn't go." Quietly, all units, he spoke into the communication system that reached every human military installation from Earth to the outer planets. "This is General Hyunwoo. The enemy has come in force to destroy us. We will not surrender. We will not flee. We will fight for every meter of space, every second of time. And if we must fall, we fall as humans, free, defiant, and undefeated in spirit. All ships engage at will. Show them what it costs to threaten Earth." The response came from thousands of voices, speaking dozens of languages, united in one message: for Earth, for humanity, for freedom. The battle began at the edge of the solar system, where the first wave of human defenders met the collective fleet. They were massively outnumbered. Their ships were damaged from previous battles. Their weapons were running low on ammunition. But they fought like demons, using every insane tactic they had developed over months of warfare. Seojin led his squadron in what he assumed would be his last flight. His fighter was held together by spare parts and prayers. His weapon systems were glitching. He had maybe enough fuel for one more high-speed maneuver. But when he saw the collective fleet bearing down on Earth, he felt something that surprised him joy. Not because he wanted to die, but because he was going to die doing something that mattered. "All fighters, this is Seojin. They want to take our home. I say we make them choke on it. Follow me in." They dove into the heart of the enemy formation. Weapons blazing, engines screaming, human voices raised in war cries and songs. The collective's point defense systems tried to track them, but human pilots had learned to fly in ways that made no mathematical sense. They died, but they took collective ships with them. Every single one. On the lunar surface, Minho's ground forces fought against landing parties trying to establish beachheads. The collective soldiers had learned some lessons from previous encounters, but they still couldn't match human ferocity in close combat. Minho himself engaged in hand-to-hand fighting with enemy troops using techniques no military academy taught because they were considered too brutal, too savage, too human. "Is that all you've got?" he shouted at a towering alien warrior. After disarming it with a move that involved a combat knife and a complete disregard for his own safety, You've been bullying peaceful civilizations for 10,000 years, and you can't even beat one crazy human with a knife." The alien didn't answer, but its expression suggested it was reconsidering its career choices in orbit. Yuna worked from a command ship that was taking heavy fire, systems failing around her as she typed frantically. She had one last trick to play, one final hack that might make a difference. She had found the collective's fleet coordination network, the system that allowed thousands of ships to work in perfect synchronization, and she was going to break it. "Come on," she muttered, fingers flying across her keyboard as explosions rocked the ship. "Just need another 30 seconds. 20 seconds later, every collective ship in the battle received conflicting orders simultaneously. Fire on target group Alpha. No Beta, no Delta. Maintain formation 7. No, formation 12. Retreat to position 9. No, advance to position 3. The perfect military machine that relied on flawless coordination suddenly had no idea what it was supposed to be doing. The confusion lasted only minutes before collective command sorted it out. But minutes in a battle were lifetimes. Human forces exploited the chaos ruthlessly, destroying ships, disrupting formations, and generally proving that sometimes the best military strategy was to make the enemy as confused as you were. But it wasn't enough. For every collective ship destroyed, 10 more took its position. For every small victory humanity achieved, the overall battle continued to turn against them. Earth's defenses were being overwhelmed, systems were failing, casualties were mounting to catastrophic levels. G1 watched from her laboratory, converted into a tactical analysis center, as the battle projections grew darker. They had minutes, maybe hours, before the collective broke through to Earth itself. She thought about her family, about her friends, about the billions of people on the planet who were about to die. She thought about how close they had come to winning. Her computer beeped. "Incoming transmission, source unknown." She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. The screen flickered, and she saw something that made no sense. An alien face, but not collective. Different species entirely, with features that looked almost reptilian. Human scientist Joanne, the alien said in halting but understandable Korean. "We are the resistance from the Dreven system. We have been watching your fight. We are coming to help." What? How the alien's expression might have been a smile. "Your human Yuna sent messages to many worlds, showed us that collective can be beaten, showed us that freedom is possible. We have stolen ships. We are not many, but we are coming." The transmission ended. Guan sat frozen for a moment, then her hands flew across her keyboard. She accessed long-range sensors, adjusted the parameters, and found them. Dozens of ships, crude constructions clearly not built by the collective moving toward Earth. Then she found more, and more. From systems across the collective's territory, ships were coming. Stolen vessels, improvised warships, anything that could fly and fight. "Tsunwu," she screamed into her communicator. "We have incoming ships, but they're not collective. They're the resistance movements. They're coming to help us." On the command deck of a collective flagship, the admiral in charge of the assault watched as his sensors detected the approaching ships. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Every enslaved species that had seen Earth's resistance, every world that had dreamed of freedom was sending whatever they could. "This is impossible," the admiral said. "They cannot coordinate an attack. They have no military experience. They barely know how to fly those ships." His tactical officer looked up from the displays, and there was something like fear in its eyes. "Admiral, they are not coordinating. They are all just attacking from every direction, with no formation, no strategy. No, like humans," the admiral finished quietly. The battle transformed. The collective found itself fighting not one species, but hundreds. All of them following the human example of chaotic, unpredictable, suicidal bravery. A ship crewed by crystalline beings from the Velar system rammed a collective cruiser at full speed. Gaseous entities from the nebulose cluster somehow weaponized their own atmospheric composition to corrode enemy hulls. A species that communicated through color changes used their ship's lights to broadcast messages of defiance that the collective's computers couldn't even parse. It was beautiful. It was insane. It was very, very human, even though most of the warriors weren't human at all. Yemen's team, still operating behind enemy lines on captured collective vessels. Receive new orders. Find the fleet's main command nexus and destroy it. They fought their way through corridors now filled with collective soldiers who were finally learning to fight like their enemies, with desperation and fury. But human soldiers had been training for desperate fighting their entire lives. They reached the command nexus, a massive computer core that coordinated the entire collective fleet. Yemen placed explosive charges with hands that shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. As the timer counted down, he looked at his team. They all knew they wouldn't get out before the explosion. "Been an honor," he said simply. "See you on the other side," someone replied. The explosion tore through the heart of the collective fleet's coordination. Thousands of ships suddenly lost their ability to work together. They didn't stop fighting, but they stopped being an organized force. They became individual vessels, each trying to make its own decisions. And that made all the difference. The battle raged for another 6 hours. By the end, space around Earth was filled with debris from both sides. The collective fleet, battered and broken, began to retreat. Not in an organized withdrawal, but in panicked flight. For the first time in their 10,000-year history, the collective was running away. On Earth, humanity watched as the enemy fleet disappeared into faster-than-light travel. The cheering started in the command centers and spread across the planet. They had won. Against impossible odds, against every logical prediction, humanity had won. But Hyun-woo didn't cheer. He stood before the casualty reports, looking at the names of the dead. Thousands of humans. Tens of thousands of aliens from resistance movements who had died fighting for Earth's freedom. They had won, but the price had been devastating. Murray found him there hours later. "The Collective Council is requesting communication," she said quietly. "They want to discuss terms of our surrender." Hyun-woo asked bitterly. "No," Murray replied, and there was wonder in her voice. "Terms of theirs?" The hologram that appeared in the command center a day later showed not Thalvin or Vexther, but the entire Collective Council. 12 beings of different species, all of them looking diminished somehow, smaller than they should be. "Humans of Earth," the central figure spoke. "We have underestimated you. We have lost this conflict. We formally withdraw all claims to your world and offer a cessation of hostilities." Hyun-woo stepped forward, flanked by Murray and Jiwon and the other species. "The ones you've enslaved for 10,000 years? The council member was silent for a long moment. "We cannot hold an empire that no longer wishes to be held. If Earth demands freedom for them as a condition of peace, then we have no choice but to accept." "We do demand it," Murray said firmly. "Every species. Every world. Complete independence, not just from the collective, but to choose their own futures." "Agreed," the council member said. And it looked like the word physically hurt. Over the following months, the collective's empire dissolved. Some species chose to maintain relationships with their former rulers. Others rejected everything about the collective. Many looked to Earth for guidance, and humanity had to make a choice in the rebuilt command center. It's now converted back to a diplomatic facility. Earth's leaders debated. They had the power to become the new dominant force in the galaxy. They had the military reputation, the technology, the respect of hundreds of worlds. They could rule if they wanted. "We didn't fight to become conquerors," Guan argued. "We fought for freedom." "But someone needs to maintain order," another leader countered. "The galaxy is in chaos. We could provide stability." Hyun-woo listened to both sides, then spoke. "We could rule? We probably could maintain the galaxy through force, just like the collective did. But then we'd be no better than them. We'd just be another empire, forcing others to live under our rules. So what do we do?" Murray asked. "We offer an alternative. A real union, not an empire. Where every species has a voice. Where decisions are made collectively, not by force. Where freedom is the foundation, not submission." It took 5 years to build what they called the Galactic Union. Not every species joined. Not every world agreed with its principles. But enough did that a new structure began to emerge across the galaxy. One based on cooperation rather than conquest. Guan, older now, and with gray in her hair, stood in a space station that orbited no particular world, a neutral ground where species met as equals. She watched as a young human engineer worked alongside an alien from the former collective, solving a technical problem together. The alien's grandparents had tried to conquer Earth. Now their grandchildren were building a future together. "We did it," Hyunwoo said, joining her at the observation window. He was retired from military service now, but still consulted on security matters. "We actually did it, did we?" Ji-won asked. "We wanted freedom. Got it. But we also got responsibility. The galaxy looks to us now, whether we want them to or not." "Then we'll have to be worthy of that trust," Myray added, walking up to join them. She had become one of the Union's primary diplomats, helping species learn to talk to each other instead of fighting. "We'll make mistakes. We'll struggle. But that's very human, isn't it? To keep trying, even when it's hard." Somewhere on Earth, in a military cemetery, a monument stood. It listed the names of every human who died defending their world. At the base, an inscription read, "They tried to rule us. We chose to free them instead." And above Earth, in orbit, ships from 100 worlds flew together, each one free, each one different, each one equal. The galaxy had tried to rule humanity and learned that humanity couldn't be ruled. But more importantly, humanity had learned something too, that freedom wasn't something you kept for yourself. It was something you shared with everyone, even your enemies. That was the lesson Earth taught the galaxy. That was why when the history of this era was written, it was called not the human conquest or the human empire, but simply the liberation. The time when one stubborn species refused to surrender and accidentally freed an entire galaxy in the process.